Well, I'm sitting here today with Mr. International Joe, Dr. Beasley. Mr. Beasley, we have just wrapped up both of the conventions, the Democratic and the Republican. Give me your thought and your assessment of the president and who would be best to represent the United States around the world.
Well, that's a very interesting question. I did watch both conventions, not all, but most. I heard the speech from Mr. Trump and also from Ms. Clinton, and was really struck by some of the contrast and the tone. Quite frankly, I thought the tone at the Democratic convention was much more positive and upbeat and more inclusive. But having said that, Ms. Clinton still have lots of high negatives, and from the standpoint of who would be the most effective president at home and abroad, at first blush, of course, you would think that Hillary would be heads and shoulders above Mr. Trump. But I believe that Ms. Clinton must make more concessions to her key constituents, African Americans specifically. I know that while she was Secretary of State, she played some roles that I thought didn't bode well for us. For example, I'm always in Haiti, and I have a great affinity for the people of Haiti. And the president of Haiti was seeking like a 15-cent per hour raise for the Haitian workers, and the minimum wage as it stands now is extremely low. But the U.S. ambassador to Haiti, who don't look like us, was opposed to it, and she was able to get Ms. Clinton backing to block a 15-cent wage increase in Haiti. And I know that she had recalled a number of black ambassadors. We have so few, but I think the ambassador from South Africa was recalled by Ms. Clinton. And one of the things I think that Ms. Clinton must do is to make a pledge to African Americans that we would place African Americans in ambassadorships throughout the black world. I think that's something very small, but I think we need to get it from her in writing, because many people say the word is not her bond. So I think it needs to be in writing, and a number of other things. But from the standpoint of who would be best abroad, there's a lot of talk that Mr. Trump is doing, and he seemed to have an affinity with the president of Russia. And some of the things that he's saying appeal to me. For example, he's talking about making the allies pay their fair share in NATO, and which I think would be a responsible thing for them to do. How is it that we defend all of Europe, and they don't want to pay? They only ask to pay 2% of their budget toward their own defense, and they're not doing that. So I think some of these, what I call unholy alliances that's been set up in the world, like the European Union, and I was really overjoyed when Great Britain got out of the Union, and quite frankly, it really changes dynamics, throughout Europe, because as I see the European Union, it's a cabal of nations that have pledged mutual defense, and which would suggest that if one country would invade them, then all of the nations in the EU and NATO would kind of gang up. And quite frankly, I believe the European Union and NATO is a part of the global white supremacy that has been underway for over 500 years that has been very detrimental to African people all over the world. So I think on one hand, well, Mr. Trump sounds like a madman, and perhaps he is, but nonetheless, I think that if Ms. Clinton is elected president, it's going to be business as usual, which don't bode very well for African people here and abroad. So I believe that if someone like Mr. Trump, who is really kind of like a wild card, if he's elected, I believe the whole world would feel some changes, and God knows black people throughout the world need change.
Mr. Beasley, as you sit and listen to the Democratic and Republican convention, you didn't hear anything about poor folks. I'm looking at it in Philadelphia, only a few blocks and a couple of miles. All the poverty that's going on in that inner city. When are we going to talk about how we're going to help the poor, how we're going to help the middle class?
Well, you know, the poor generally is expected not to participate from the standpoint of voting. And so, for the most part, the politicians just don't even mention the word poor. And that's why I was really so impressed last week, I guess it was, at the SCLC convention, where the emphasis was on the poor. And that is in keeping with Dr. King, who understood that the poor is the people that must be cared for by people of conscience. But no, there was no mention, and I think it's because they largely ignored because they're expected not to participate. So you're saying if you don't vote, you don't count. And I don't think that's a good posture for a leader, because leaders should be for all of the people, regardless of of status and agenda, race, just across the board. And of course the Republican convention and Mr. Trump, there was a lot of negativity around things like immigration and his proposal to deport 11 million people, which is insane. Of course, it'll never happen. And pretty much Mr. Trump sounds as though you think he's a dictator. There's checks and balances in this country. You just can't say I'm going to build a wall
and just do it.
And then expect it's going to happen. It's not going to happen. The Congress will block it. And of course, if we started it, someone would go to the Supreme Court, and So the idea of Mr. Trump building a wall, everybody that got any sense already know that's a lie, and that's not going to happen.
Well, let's bring it a little closer to home. We just had the runoffs here in Georgia. We had less than a 5% registered voter turnout. What is going on, and how can we change the voter apathy?
Well, as you know, we talk a lot about being the oldest democracy in the world and how we want people to participate. But as you know, we do everything we can do to discourage people from voting, especially people that look like you and I.
All right.
And so we put all these barriers out there, and I think people are just sick and tired of the hypocrisy. And I think this idea about this great democracy that's undergirded by a capitalistic system, global capitalistic system, where so many people, are just left hanging high and dry. And as you and I sit here and look out the window, we see so many people walking by that feel that they're not included in our so-called democracy.
It's almost like Walking Dead.
Well, at The Walking Dead, and so many of our young people that have the droopy pants, as we call them. And even though I don't think they really know, have thought it out, But what I interpret from that is these young people are saying, young men, the more black men, which have been thrown in the scrap heap of our society and that are incarcerated, they're saying to America and to people like myself who has not done enough, you can go and kiss me where the sun don't shine. And if you don't like my pants hanging down off of my underwear, then that's just too bad. And so I think these are signs that there's a lot of unease and unrest in the country. And we've seen this terrible outbreak of violence over the last couple of weeks, where we had the police officers, almost as usual, shooting down black men. The incident in Baton Rouge was just unthinkable. And then we see the mass killing of police officers, and which I abhor and regret, because I don't think violence is the way. But people are just are tired, and if you try to take a man, a woman's dignity, you can take a mule to water, but you can't make him drink. And if you back a cat up in the corner, he'll attack you. And I think that's tantamount to where
we are today.
Many of us feel now, that our backs are against the wall, and we have to fight back.
On that note, I'll say thank you, Mr. Beasley, and we'll be back on next week.
Thank you. Always good seeing you, Clyde.
Likewise.